The boardroom on the 40th floor of Tech Vanguard Industries had gone quiet in a way that made people uneasy. Not the polite silence of executives waiting their turn to speak, but the kind that followed something irreversible. The kind that made the air feel heavier than it had been seconds before. No one looked at anyone else. Laptops sat open but forgotten. A half-raised hand never finished its motion. A glass of water trembled slightly in someone's grip before being set down untouched. These were people who negotiated 8-figure contracts without blinking, who spoke in bullet points and deadlines. Now they avoided eye contact like strangers caught in an elevator after an argument. Whatever had just been said had cracked something. Victoria Sterling stood at the head of the table, her posture locked in place. At 38, she was known for controlling rooms without raising her voice. Her presence alone usually tightened spines. Today, for the first time, that authority had stalled. Her expression remained composed, but her eyes betrayed her. They searched the room and found nothing solid to land on. The power she was used to holding felt suddenly weightless. Across the polished marble floor, near the far wall where people rarely stood unless they were meant to be overlooked, Jamal Washington remained still. His maintenance cart was parked beside him, one hand resting lightly on its handle. He had not moved since speaking. He had not needed to. Moments ago, Jamal had been invisible in the way service workers often were in corporate spaces. Present, but unacknowledged. A man people stepped around without noticing. Now, no one could look away from him, even if they wanted to. Yet they did not look at him directly either. Several executives stared at the tabletop. One senior engineer adjusted his glasses again and again, as if his vision had betrayed him. Another man cleared his throat, then thought better of it. The silence stretched, uncomfortable, and exposed. Jamal felt it before he understood it. A shift, not triumph, not relief. Something colder and more uncertain. He had not raised his voice. He had not challenged anyone outright. He had simply spoken the truth as he saw it, the way he always did when he was alone with broken machines late at night. But this time, the truth had landed in a room built on hierarchy. Victoria finally inhaled, slow and controlled. She opened her mouth, then closed it again. That alone sent a ripple through the room. People noticed. They always noticed when she hesitated. Her fingers tightened against the edge of the conference table. The faint click of her ring against glass sounded louder than it should have. She turned slightly as if to regain command of the space, but something in the room resisted her. It was subtle, almost polite, and completely new. Jamal did not smile. He did not step forward. He understood instinctively that movement would cheapen the moment. His grandfather had taught him that when something important reveals itself, you let it breathe. From the corner of his eye, Jamal caught a few glances sent his way, not dismissive ones, not amused ones. These were cautious looks, measuring looks, the kind people reserved for variables they had not accounted for. Fear crept in beneath the surface of the tension. Not Jamal's fear, theirs. Someone near the window shifted uncomfortably, whispering something under their breath. Another executive shook her head slowly, as if trying to rewind time. The unspoken question hung in the air. If he was right, what did that say about the rest of them? Victoria straightened at last, her jaw set. She was still the CEO. Everyone in the room knew that, but titles felt thinner now, less certain. Jamal met her gaze for the first time. There was no challenge in his eyes, no apology either, just calm. The kind that came from knowing you had already crossed the point of no return. Outside the glass walls, Silicon Valley stretched endlessly below, unaware that something small but permanent had just changed on the 40th floor. No one spoke, but everyone understood something had shifted, and it could not be undone. Before the silence took over the room, before a single sentence bent the balance of power, Victoria Sterling believed in systems the way other people believed in faith. If the rules were followed, order would prevail. If credentials were verified, competence was guaranteed. If authority was clear, chaos stayed out. That belief had built her career. Victoria rose through Tech Vanguard Industries with ruthless efficiency. At 38, she sat at the top of a company praised in business magazines for its discipline and execution. Her calendar was timed to the minute. Her emails were short, decisive, and copied to the right people. She trusted process over instinct, data over doubt, hierarchy over hesitation. In her mind, systems existed to protect those who earned their place within them, and she had earned hers. Tech Vanguard reflected her philosophy. The hiring pipeline favored Ivy League resumes. Conference room walls were decorated with framed diplomas and patent certificates. Engineers spoke in acronyms and prestige references, quietly measuring one another by alma mater and title. Manual labor existed only on the edges of the building, necessary but unseen. Maintenance workers were background noise. They came in early or late. They wore different badges. They did not belong in meetings. Jamal Washington learned that quickly. Officially, his title read Facilities Maintenance. Unofficially, he was the janitor. The word followed him through the building like a shadow. People said it without malice most of the time. Sometimes they said it with a smirk. Sometimes they did not say his name at all. Jamal kept his head down and did his job. He cleaned conference rooms after strategy sessions that lasted longer than his entire workday. He replaced burnt-out lights while engineers argued about budgets below him. He emptied trash cans filled with rejected proposals and half-finished ideas. What most people never noticed was how often he paused. Jamal listened. He watched. He understood more than he was allowed to speak. He held a community college degree in mechanical engineering, earned slowly while working nights and weekends. He had planned to transfer. Life intervened. His mother got sick. Breast cancer, aggressive, expensive. The math had been unforgiving. Tuition or treatment. He chose treatment without hesitation. Every paycheck went somewhere important. At work, his knowledge stayed invisible. When he mentioned a concern about vibration patterns near the prototype lab, an engineer waved him off without looking up from his screen. When he quietly asked why a system kept overheating at the same interval, someone laughed and told him to stick to mopping. Emails were worse. Internal threads referred to him as the cleaning guy. One message joked about whether he could even understand the diagrams he sometimes stared at. Another suggested moving his shifts to nights so he would not be seen by investors. Victoria saw those emails. She never responded to them. Silence, in her world, meant agreement. During one late afternoon meeting, as voices rose and tempers shortened, a junior engineer named Sarah Kim hesitated before speaking. "Maybe we are missing something obvious," she said carefully. "Something simple." Victoria did not look at her. She tapped her pen once against the table. "We have the best minds in the industry on this," she replied. "If it were obvious, we would have found it." The discussion moved on. Jamal stood by the wall, refilling water pitchers. Unseen as always, he heard the words. He felt the weight of them. Obvious did not mean unimportant. Sometimes it meant ignored, but the system had rules, and Victoria believed in them. As far as she was concerned, everything was still under control. By the time the German investors were confirmed on the calendar, the engine had failed 17 more times. It was always the same pattern. The AI-guided system would start clean, run smooth, almost hopeful, and then collapse into shutdown as if it had reached some invisible wall no one else could see. Engineers stopped using words like glitch or bug. They started using phrases like catastrophic risk and reputational exposure. The pressure crawled through the building. Victoria called the all-hands meeting on a Tuesday morning. No advance notice, no soft language. 200 employees packed into the main auditorium, laptops balanced on knees, phones silenced by instinct. Everyone knew what this was about. She stood center stage, framed by a massive screen, frozen on a single line of text. System failure. No alternative diagnostics available. Her voice cut through the room, sharp and controlled. "We are 6 weeks behind schedule, 6 weeks from burning our credibility to the ground." No one moved. The German delegation arrives in 48 hours. She continued. "Klaus Müller does not forgive excuses. He does not fund second chances. If this engine does not perform, we lose more than money. We lose relevance." She paced slowly, heels clicking in measured rhythm. People followed the sound without lifting their heads. "Let me be very clear," Victoria said. "We will not carry dead weight into this evaluation." The word landed hard. Her eyes swept the room. They paused on the engineers first, then the analysts, then the interns. Finally, they stopped at the back. At Jamal. He stood near the exit as usual, hands clasped loosely in front of him, maintenance badge visible against his shirt. He felt the attention hit him like a draft of cold air. Some people noticed the pause. Most pretended not to. If this team cannot deliver, she continued, positions will be reevaluated. Roles that do not directly contribute to solutions will be eliminated. Effective immediately. A murmur rippled through the crowd. Fear has a sound. Jamal had heard it before. His first instinct was to stay quiet. That instinct had kept him employed, kept his mother's treatments paid for, kept him invisible. But something about the engine would not let him rest. Every night for weeks, he had listened to it run and fail. He had felt the vibration through the floor. He had watched the data repeat itself like a confession no one wanted to hear. The problem was not chaos. It was precision fighting precision. Victoria turned back to the screen, already preparing to end the meeting. That was when Jamal raised his hand. It was not dramatic. No sudden movement. Just a hand lifting into the air, steady and unmistakable. The room reacted before he spoke. People turned, confused. A few frowned. Someone whispered, "Is that the janitor?" Victoria froze mid-step. Slowly, she turned. "Yes," she said. Her tone was polite. "Dangerous. Do you have something to add?" Jamal swallowed once. His voice, when it came, was calm. "I might be wrong," he said. "But the shutdown pattern does not look like a software failure." A few engineers stiffened. "It looks like harmonic conflict between the AI control system and the mechanical tolerances, like they are calibrated to different assumptions." Silence dropped hard and fast. Jamal did not accuse. He did not challenge. He did not name anyone. He simply stated what he had been hearing all along. The screen behind Victoria flickered. Sarah Kim stared at him. Marcus Brooks stopped typing. Somewhere in the front row, a board member leaned forward without realizing it. Victoria's expression did not change, but something in the room did. For the first time, her authority did not feel absolute. After that remark, the room was not sure who held the upper hand anymore. No one interrupted him. That alone was strange. Jamal felt it immediately, the way a room changes temperature before a storm. 200 people were looking at him now, not past him, not around him, at him. He could feel their attention settle on his shoulders, heavy and unfamiliar. Victoria's eyes narrowed, not in anger, but calculation. Harmonic conflict, she repeated slowly, as if testing the phrase for weakness. "You are suggesting that our engineers misdiagnosed a core failure." Jamal shook his head once. Small, respectful. "I am saying the system may be doing exactly what it was designed to do, just not with the assumptions it was given." A low, uneasy murmur rippled through the seats. Marcus Brooks, head of the engineering team, shifted forward. His voice carried the edge of someone who had slept 3 hours a night for weeks. "That makes no sense. We ran 67 diagnostics. The AI reports internal consistency." "I believe it does," Jamal replied. "That might be the problem." Victoria raised a hand. The room fell quiet again. "And you know this because?" she asked. Jamal hesitated. This was the line. Step over it, and there was no stepping back. "Because the failure happens at the same interval every time," he said. 14 minutes, 37 seconds. Not random, not degraded. Consistent. Like two systems trying to correct each other into collapse. Sarah Kim's breath caught. "That matches the logs," she said before she could stop herself. Victoria turned toward her sharply. Sarah stiffened, already regretting the words. Jamal continued, his voice steady but softer now. "If the AI was calibrated under one measurement assumption and the mechanical components were manufactured under another, even a small mismatch could create resonance issues. Not enough to fail immediately, just enough to overcorrect until shutdown." The auditorium was silent again, but it was a different silence now. This one leaned forward. Victoria stared at him. Really stared. "Where did you study harmonic calibration?" she asked. Jamal did not flinch. "Community college. Nights, and years of hands-on work before that." A few people exchanged looks, some skeptical, some curious, one or two uncomfortable. Victoria smiled. It was controlled, thin. "So let me understand this," she said. "You are telling me that after 6 weeks, dozens of experts, and millions of dollars, the breakthrough comes from someone whose job is to clean this building." Jamal met her gaze. He did not smile back. "My job is to fix things that stop working," he said quietly. The words hung there. No bravado, no apology. Just truth. Victoria looked around the room. She expected laughter, support, agreement. She found none. Faces that had always mirrored her confidence now reflected something else. Doubt, curiosity, hesitation. For the first time since she had taken this company public, Victoria Sterling felt the ground shift beneath her certainty. She straightened, reclaiming her posture. "Enough," she said. "This meeting is adjourned." But the room did not release its tension. People stood slowly, conversations hushed. Eyes followed Jamal as he lowered his hand and stepped back toward the wall where he belonged. Belonged, until now. Victoria watched. Him go, her expression unreadable. She still believed in the system, but for the first time, she was no longer sure it believed in her. The retaliation came faster than Jamal expected. By the next morning, the building buzzed with a new kind of energy. It was not urgency. It was curiosity sharpened into something cruel. People whispered in hallways. Phones stayed angled low, screens glowing with messages that stopped whenever Jamal walked past. Word traveled quickly in places like Tech Vanguard. A maintenance worker had spoken out of turn. A CEO had paused. That alone was enough to turn a company into an audience waiting for the next act. Victoria called another meeting. This one was different. The boardroom was arranged like a stage. Cameras were positioned along the walls, subtle but intentional. The German investors sat at the table. Klaus Müller at the center, hands folded, expression unreadable. His presence changed everything. This was no longer an internal matter. It was a performance. Victoria stood tall, composed once again. Whatever doubt had flickered the day before was gone, buried beneath calculation. "Since there seems to be confusion about expertise," she said evenly, "I believe clarity is required." Her gaze found Jamal immediately. "You raised a concern yesterday, Mr. Washington, one that implies a fundamental flaw in our diagnostic process." Several heads turned toward him, some with interest, others with barely hidden amusement. Victoria continued, her voice smooth. "Rather than speculate, we will test that concern. Publicly, transparently." A few engineers shifted uncomfortably. Someone near the back let out a short, nervous laugh. Jamal felt his stomach tighten. "You will have the opportunity to demonstrate your theory," Victoria said, "in real time, in front of our board and our partners." Klaus Müller inclined his head slightly, as if intrigued by the turn of events. "If you succeed," Victoria added, "then perhaps we have all learned something valuable." She paused. "If you fail, then we can finally put this distraction to rest." The word distraction landed like a slap. A ripple of murmurs followed. Someone whispered, "This is insane." Another muttered, "She is setting him up." Jamal stood frozen, every instinct telling him this was dangerous. This was not a chance. It was a trap dressed as opportunity. He could feel the weight of the room pressing in, the looks, the expectations, the quiet satisfaction on a few faces that wanted to see him humbled. In the hallway afterward, the pressure intensified. A pair of engineers passed him, one snickering softly. "Guess we are all janitors now," the other said, just loud enough to hear. Another voice added, "Better hope your mop comes with a miracle." Jamal clenched his jaw. Anger surged, sharp and hot, but he swallowed it down. He had learned long ago that anger in places like this only confirmed what they already believed. Yet not everyone looked away. Sarah Kim stopped him near the elevators. Her voice was low. "That thing you said yesterday," she began, "about the timing. It made sense." Jamal met her eyes, surprised. "You should be careful," she added. "She is not doing this to be fair." "I know," Jamal replied. Sarah hesitated, then nodded. "For what it is worth, I hope you're right." As Jamal stepped into the elevator, the doors closing slowly, fear finally surfaced beneath the anger. If he failed, he would not just lose his job, he would lose his stability, his mother's treatments, his future. Victoria was betting his entire life against her pride, and the building watched in silence as the stakes were set. The hours that followed felt stretched, distorted, like time itself had become part of the punishment. Jamal returned to his duties, but nothing felt routine anymore. Every movement drew attention. Conversation stopped when he entered a room. A few people stared openly now, no longer bothering to pretend he was invisible. Others avoided him entirely, as if his presence carried risk. By noon, the internal emails started circulating. Meeting scheduled, live technical demonstration, attendance mandatory. Someone had added a calendar note with a smiling emoji, and the subject line read simply, "Let's see what happens." Jamal did not need to open it to know who sent it. In the break room, two analysts whispered near the coffee machine. "She's really going to let him try," one said. "Try what exactly?" the other replied. "Embarrass himself." Their laughter followed Jamal down the hallway like static. The humiliation was intentional. Victoria understood crowds. She understood pressure. If Jamal broke under it, she would not need to fire him. He would disappear on his own, reputation ruined, lesson delivered to anyone else who might forget their place. But pressure has a way of revealing things. That afternoon, Jamal stood alone in the equipment room, staring at the engine schematic pinned to the wall. His hands trembled slightly, not from doubt, but from restraint. Every instinct told him to walk away, to protect himself, to survive. He thought of his mother sitting in a waiting room with outdated magazines and a blanket pulled tight around her shoulders. He thought of the quiet dignity she carried, even on the worst days. He thought of how often he had chosen silence to keep the lights on. And he thought of the engine, how it struggled not because it was broken, but because it was misunderstood. Late that evening, as he cleaned the boardroom, someone lingered behind. It was Marcus Brooks. The lead engineer looked exhausted. His confidence added like an afterthought rather than armor. "I do not agree with how this is being handled," Marcus said quietly. "For what it's worth." Jamal did not answer right away. "You know she wants you to fail," Marcus continued. "If you go through with this, there is no middle ground." Jamal nodded. "I know." "Then why do it?" Jamal looked at the engine through the glass wall. "Because if I don't," he said, "nothing changes." Marcus hesitated, then sighed. "If you need access to the diagnostics, I can make sure it happens." It was not an apology. It was not solidarity. But it was something. When Jamal finally left the building that night, the city lights felt harsher than usual. His phone buzzed with a message from his mother asking how work was going. He stared at the screen for a long moment before typing back, "Busy. I'll call you tomorrow." He stopped at the entrance, the glass doors reflecting his own tired face back at him. He could still walk away. But some lines, once crossed, could not be uncrossed. The next morning, Jamal walked back into Tech Vanguard with his shoulders squared and his decision made. He would accept the challenge. The doors to the executive boardroom opened like the gates to a courtroom. Jamal felt it immediately. The cameras, the lights. The quiet anticipation sharpened into judgment. A red indicator blinked in the corner of the room. Live. Every movement was being streamed, every breath recorded. Somewhere beyond the glass walls, thousands of people were watching through screens, forming opinions before he even reached the table. The board sat in a clean line, expressions carefully neutral. The German investors occupied the center seats, Klaus Müller unmoving, hands folded as if observing a technical experiment rather than a human being. Victoria stood slightly apart, arms crossed, confidence restored for the audience. This was her terrain again. Jamal crossed the room slowly. He could feel eyes tracking him from every direction, some curious, some amused, some already convinced of the ending. He kept his hands visible, relaxed, deliberate. A technician adjusted a microphone near the engine. The sound echoed too loudly. Someone cleared their throat. No one offered Jamal a seat. Victoria broke the silence. "You may begin when ready," she said, her tone courteous enough to sound fair. "We have allotted 90 minutes. 90 minutes to prove his worth, or confirm their assumptions." Jamal nodded once. As he approached the engine, the weight hit him all at once. If he failed, this would not be framed as a technical misstep. It would be framed as proof. Proof that hierarchy worked. Proof that people like him belonged where they had been placed. Proof that speaking out of turn came with consequences. His chest tightened. Detroit surfaced in his mind without warning. A cramped garage with oil-stained concrete. His grandfather's voice cutting through the noise of a struggling engine. Listen first, touch second, fix last. He remembered being 12 years old, watching grown men laugh when his grandfather corrected them, watching those same men fall silent when the engine roared back to life. He remembered being underestimated before he ever understood the word. Jamal placed his palm against the engine housing. Warm, too warm, not overheated, tense. Someone behind him whispered something. He did not turn. He closed his eyes for a moment, just long enough to shut out the room. The isolation was complete now. No allies, no safety net, just him and a machine that had been misunderstood by people who believed intelligence came with titles. He opened his eyes. "Let's start with a baseline run," Jamal said quietly. Victoria raised an eyebrow but nodded to the technician. The engine powered on. The sound filled the room, deep and mechanical, vibrating through the floor. Jamal did not look at the screens. He listened. 14 minutes had defeated everyone else. He felt the countdown settle into his bones as the engine ran, and for the first time since he walked into the room, Jamal stopped thinking about who was watching. He began to listen. The engine settled into its rhythm, steady at first, almost polite. Jamal remained still, eyes half closed, one hand resting against the casing. To everyone else, it probably looked like hesitation, like uncertainty. Victoria watched closely, waiting for discomfort to show, for nerves, for mistakes. They mistook stillness for weakness. The room filled with sound, not loud, not chaotic, controlled, measured, the kind of sound engineers trusted because it matched what the data promised. Screens flickered with numbers. Green indicators glowed. A few people relaxed back into their chairs, already convinced this was going to be uneventful in the worst possible way. Someone near the back whispered, "He's just standing there." Another voice followed, "This is it?" Jamal heard none of it. In his mind, the boardroom dissolved. Detroit came back in fragments, the smell of oil and metal, his grandfather wiping his hands on a rag that never quite got clean, the way Samuel Washington used to lean close to an engine, head tilted, listening like it was speaking directly to him. "They'll tell you it's perfect because the numbers say so," his grandfather used to say, "but numbers don't feel tension. You do." Jamal shifted his hand slightly. There it was. A faint vibration, almost imperceptible, a tremor that didn't belong, not loud enough to trigger alarms, just enough to create resistance beneath the surface. He opened his eyes and glanced at the timer on the screen. 9 minutes. Around the room, posture changed. A few engineers leaned forward. Marcus Brooks watched Jamal's hand with a furrowed brow, confusion replacing skepticism. "What is he looking for?" someone murmured. Jamal stepped back and moved to the side of the engine, crouching slightly to bring his ear closer to the lower assembly. A camera adjusted to follow him. The red light blinked brighter. The sound shifted again. Subtle. Tight. Jamal's jaw clenched. There it was. The same strain he had felt every night when the building was empty. The sound of a system correcting itself too aggressively. He stood and turned toward the diagnostic station. "I need access to the vibration readouts," he said. Victoria hesitated for a fraction of a second. "Give it to him," Klaus Miller said calmly. The technician complied. As the data populated the screen, Jamal compared what he heard to what he saw. The mismatch was there, not dramatic, just consistent. 12 minutes. The room began to tense. This was where the engine always failed. Someone crossed their arms. Another person glanced at Victoria, waiting for her reaction. She remained still, but her eyes had sharpened. Jamal exhaled slowly. If he was wrong, it would happen now. The vibration intensified. Barely. Enough to be felt, not enough to be obvious. The kind of problem that lived in the margins. 13 minutes. A bead of sweat slid down Jamal's temple. He ignored it. He leaned in again, listening harder, deeper, letting everything else fall away. The room, the cameras, the judgment, just the engine. 14 minutes. A few people inhaled sharply. 14 minutes and 30 seconds. The sound tightened, strained against itself. Jamal straightened. "There it is," he said quietly. The engine shuddered, just slightly, as if on the edge of collapse. And Jamal reached for his tools. He did not look at Victoria. He did not look at the board. He turned fully toward the machine and began his work. The room leaned forward without realizing it. Jamal worked with a calm that felt almost out of place under the lights. He did not rush. He did not narrate for the cameras. His hands moved with quiet confidence, opening panels, loosening fasteners, tracing components as if reacquainting himself with an old argument rather than fighting a crisis. Marcus Brooks frowned at the diagnostic screens. "The AI parameters are stable," he said, almost to himself. "There's no fault cascade." "That's because the AI isn't wrong," Jamal replied, not looking up. "It's doing exactly what it was told to do." Victoria's eyes sharpened. "Then what is the problem?" Jamal paused, just long enough to choose his words. It's a translation issue, he said, between how this engine was built and how it's being controlled. He straightened and gestured toward the exposed assembly. This engine was manufactured under metric tolerances, extremely tight ones. German standards assume near-perfect physical consistency. The control system was calibrated here under imperial assumptions, different margins, different expectations. Sarah Kim's breath caught. You're saying the AI thinks it needs to correct imperfections that aren't there? Yes, Jamal said. So it keeps adjusting, over and over, until it creates the very instability it's trying to prevent. The room was silent again, but this time it wasn't disbelief. It was recognition beginning to surface. Klaus Miller leaned forward slightly. That would mean the failure is not digital. It is philosophical. Jamal nodded. Two engineering cultures trying to dominate the same machine. Victoria opened her mouth, then closed it. For the first time, she looked uncertain. Marcus shook his head slowly. We never considered that. We kept rewriting the software. Because the system only listens to credentials, Jamal said quietly, not to what's actually happening. The words were not an accusation. They were worse. They were true. He reached into his tool bag and pulled out a small component. Simple, unremarkable, a harmonic dampener, he said. It doesn't change the AI. It doesn't rebuild the engine. It just gives both systems a buffer, a place to meet. Someone laughed nervously. That's it. That's your solution. It's not impressive, Jamal replied. It's practical. Victoria stared at the part in his hand. Weeks of pressure, millions of dollars, and this. And suddenly she understood. The problem was never brilliance. The problem was who they had refused to hear. Jamal installed the component without ceremony. No countdown, no announcement, no glance toward the cameras that were still streaming every second to an audience far beyond the glass walls. He worked the way he always had, with the quiet focus of someone more concerned with whether something functioned than whether anyone noticed. The dampener slid into place with a soft metallic click. Jamal tightened the last fastener and stepped back. All right, he said, let's run it again. No one spoke. The technician restarted the system. The engine came alive, its low hum filling the room. At first, nothing seemed different. The same steady rhythm, the same clean readings. A few people shifted in their seats, already preparing themselves for disappointment. Jamal did not move. He watched the engine the way a doctor watches a patient wake from surgery, not hopeful, attentive. 5 minutes passed, 10. The vibration that had once crept into the floor never came. Marcus Brooks leaned closer to the monitor, his brow furrowed. The correction loop is gone, he murmured. 13 minutes. Someone in the back checked the clock. 14 minutes and 30 seconds. The engine did not falter. It did not hesitate. It simply kept running. A murmur spread through the room, then died just as quickly, swallowed by disbelief. The numbers on the screen stabilized in ranges no one had seen since the prototype phase. Temperature held, pressure aligned. The AI stopped overcorrecting, no longer fighting a problem that no longer existed. Klaus Miller stood. This is clean, he said quietly. Very clean. Another minute passed, then another. The engine ran past its failure point like it had never known it. Silence followed, absolute and stunned. Jamal reached forward and shut the system down himself. The engine powered off smoothly, obediently, as if satisfied. No one applauded, no one spoke. The moment was too heavy for noise. Victoria felt it then. Not embarrassment, not anger, understanding. She looked around the room and saw it in every face. The engineers who had worked themselves into exhaustion, the executives who had trusted process over perception, the investors who now recalculated everything they thought they knew about this company, and Jamal, standing where he always stood, at the edge. Only, now the edge was the center. This was not about genius, it never had been. It was about a system that only listened to voices it recognized, a culture that filtered insight through resumes and titles and learned too late what it had been discarding. Victoria exhaled slowly. All this time, she thought, we weren't failing because we lacked intelligence. We were failing because we refused to hear it. Her gaze settled on Jamal, no longer dismissive, no longer guarded, just honest. And for the first time since she built Tech Vanguard from nothing, Victoria Sterling saw the flaw she could no longer deny. Not in the engine, in herself. The recognition came quietly at first. No announcement, no applause. Just a subtle shift in how people spoke to Jamal and how they spoke about him when they thought he wasn't listening. By the end of the week, the board's decision was formalized. Jamal Washington was offered the position of lead systems engineer on the autonomous engine program. The title came with a salary that made his hands shake when he read the number. Stock options, full benefits, a flexible schedule that would finally allow him to sit with his mother during treatment days without checking his phone every 5 minutes. Marcus Brooks shook his hand in the hallway, eyes steady, voice sincere. "We should have listened sooner," he said. Sarah Kim sent a short message that said only, "I'm glad you spoke." Jamal accepted the role without celebration. He did not savor the vindication. He understood too well how fragile recognition could be when it arrived late. For Victoria Sterling, the consequences unfolded differently. There was no dramatic firing, no public disgrace, no headlines screaming her name. That would have been too easy, too clean. Instead came meetings, closed-door meetings, compliance reviews, governance audits. Questions she had never been asked before, delivered in neutral tones that carried more weight than accusation ever could. Why was Jamal Washington classified as non-technical staff? Why were his observations excluded from formal review? Why were internal communications allowed to frame qualified employees as expendable? The investigation did not call it malice. It called it pattern. Victoria was asked to step back from daily operations while the review continued. Her authority redistributed quietly. Decisions routed around her instead of through her. Her calendar, once impenetrable, began to open with gaps she had no meetings to fill. She sat alone in her office more often now, staring out at the city she once commanded. The hardest part was not the loss of power. It was the realization that she had trusted herself more than truth. She had believed that if she was confident, she was correct. That hesitation belonged to lesser minds. That the system worked because she worked. And now the system had exposed her blind spot. Late one evening, she found Jamal in the boardroom, reviewing schematics. No cameras, no audience, just fluorescent lights and the hum of a building settling into night. She stood in the doorway for a long moment before speaking. "You were right," she said finally. Jamal looked up. He did not smile. He did not nod. "I wasn't trying to be right," he replied. "I was trying to stop something from breaking." Victoria stepped closer, then stopped. For the first time, she did not know what to say next. Words had always been her leverage. Now they felt inadequate. She searched his face for resentment and found none. That unsettled her more than anger ever could. "I thought certainty was strength," she said quietly. "I thought doubt was weakness." Jamal closed the folder in front of him. "Sometimes certainty just means you stopped listening," he said. Victoria absorbed that in silence. She had lost more than a title. She had lost the comfort of believing she could never be wrong. And in that quiet boardroom, with no witnesses to soften the truth, Victoria Sterling stood wordless before the man she had once dismissed, finally understanding the real price she had paid. Jamal did not become a different man after everything changed. That surprised people. They expected anger or pride, or at least a moment of public satisfaction, a speech, a victory lap, something that made sense of the discomfort they felt watching a system expose itself. But Jamal returned to work the same way he always had. Early, quiet, focused. His badge was different now. His title carried weight. His opinions were requested instead of tolerated, yet the way he moved through the building barely changed. He listened more than he spoke. He asked questions before offering conclusions. When meetings grew heated, he waited for the noise to pass before saying anything at all. Some mistook that for humility. It was something else. Jamal understood that justice, when it arrived, did not need decoration. He declined interviews. He asked that the internal announcement be brief. When a marketing executive suggested turning his story into a branding campaign, Jamal shook his head. "Let the work speak," he said. At home, he sat beside his mother during chemotherapy sessions without checking his phone. He fixed the loose door hinge in her apartment himself, smiling when she scolded him for still doing things the hard way. On weekends, he drove past an old auto shop in Oakland, windows boarded up, and felt a quiet gratitude settle in his chest. He had not won anything. He had simply been heard. Tech Vanguard changed too, though more slowly. New policies appeared. anonymous review channels, cross-role evaluations, a requirement that ideas be logged before titles were attached to them. It was imperfect, messy, real. Some people left, others stayed and learned. Victoria Sterling remained on the payroll, but not at the center. She watched decisions unfold without her final approval. She listened now in meetings where she once commanded. When she spoke, it was carefully, thoughtfully, as if weighing the cost of certainty before offering it. She never apologized publicly. She did not need to. One evening, months later, Jamal found her in the same boardroom where everything had broken open. The city lights glowed beyond the glass, steady and indifferent. She looked older somehow, not weaker, just unguarded. "I used to think justice meant control," she said without turning. "That if I enforced the rules hard enough, fairness would follow." Jamal set his bag down. "Justice doesn't enforce," he said. "It reveals." She nodded once. "I didn't lose my job," she said. "I lost the version of myself that thought she couldn't be wrong." Jamal considered that. "That's how it usually works," he said. Victoria turned to him. For a moment, it seemed she wanted to say more, to explain, to justify, to be understood. But she stopped herself. Some lessons don't need words. She left the room quietly, heels muted against the floor. Jamal stood alone for a while, listening to the building hum around him. The same building that once refused to see him. The same walls that now carried his ideas without needing his presence to validate them. He turned off the lights and walked out. Justice had not arrived with punishment. It had arrived with clarity, and the truth once heard refused to be silent again. The most dangerous mistake wasn't disrespect. It was believing some voices were never worth hearing.